Hey everyone, welcome to another top 10 list. This week's top 10 list was inspired by many questions I get. And the question's actually the same, it's just the amount of time I get asked this question. And that question is, what should I collect? I get that from new collectors all the time. And well, first and foremost, the truth be told is collect what you like. If you see something that's interesting, that should be the driving factor, not anything I say or anything anybody else says. But let's dive a little deeper into that, okay? How do you know what you like? Well, in order to see what you like, you have to see a little of everything. And if you see a little of everything, then maybe you will pick out something that you like. So, I decided to make a list of ways people collect, the different groups that people collect, the different things people like. And as I started writing these down, I quickly made a list of 10, and then another, and then another, and then another. I came up with 40 different ways that people can collect. You don't have to pick one of these. You can diversify any way you like. But this week's top 10 list is going to start that series. So overall, I have 40 ways to collect. Each week, I'm going to go through 10 of them, and they aren't in any particular order because there is no one way that's better than another way. There's simply what you like compared to what you don't like. Don't ever buy anything you don't like just because someone told you to. Keep your collection as your collection. All right. So, this week, like I said, we're going to go through the first 10 that I have. And like I said, these are in no particular order. There's simply the order I wrote them down. That's all. So instead of counting backwards from 10, we will count up. All right. The first on the list that I put down there, and you will see how these jump around. They are in no particular order. The first one that I wrote down was obsoletes. Well, what are obsoletes? Make sure I have them. Here we go. These are all obsoletes. These are obsolete banknotes. Obsolete banknotes were put out by individual banks, and the individual banks backed them. Most of this happened in the 1800s to 1860s, and each bank was responsible for their own stuff. The problem is that if you traveled the country, you had no idea which banks were still in existence. So the further you got from an issuing bank, the less likely the value would be accepted by anybody else. There are thousands of obsolete banknotes, and some of them have some of the coolest artwork you're ever going to find. Some of them have incredible stories. Some of them, like this one here, have even made the top 100 overall, top 100 notes. So yeah, that's number one for this week's list, obsolete notes. All right, number two. I put down counterfeit notes. I do have a couple counterfeit notes. This particular certificate here may or may not be counterfeit because they printed the proper number and then the person who came up with the idea printed the exact same order again. So he doubled the print. So some of these are real, some of these are fake. You can't tell them apart. And of course, this is my contemporary counterfeit from the 1862 series that's already marked counterfeit. It's been cut and punched. But yeah, you can devote your collection to counterfeit notes. You do have to be careful because it's technically illegal to have counterfeit notes of the current batch of notes. If it's spendable, you can't have it. If it looks like stuff that is currently spendable, that would be illegal. But something like this, obviously we don't spend this anymore, so yeah, it's legal to own. That's number two. Number three, I'm trying to reach over here because with the amount of stuff I got, it's a little, it's a little tough. All right. Number three is errors. You can see I've got all kinds of different errors here. Errors, true errors, are very difficult to find in circulation. Let's see what this one is here, the filled star. They're very difficult to find in circulation. So when it comes to buying errors, I highly recommend getting graded versions because you're going to notice stuck suffix error. Okay, or a suffix letter, I should say. That's that one. It's very easy to see what it is. Offset printing error. Solve and smear error. Cutting error. Solid star error. See how they all say error? Okay, this one's PCGS, so they just simply put what the error is on this side. But PMG will call it an error. So if you want to know if it's a legit error, I recommend getting a graded note. If you're going to go with stuff that is not graded yet, make sure you can at least see a graded example somewhere online. That way you know it's an attributed error and not just somebody's version of a printing mistake. The printing process is very sloppy, so sometimes ink can get on notes in places that you don't normally see it, but it's not considered an error. These are errors. If you see an error and it's not graded, try to find a graded example just to verify that the example is real. All right. Okay, let's see. Number 4, I have NPCs. What are NPCs? NPCs, not N, not non-player characters for all you Dungeons and Dragons people. NPC. NPC is military payment certificates. These were put out by the military and given to servicemen to be spent on bases. That way they wouldn't have to handle money. If they had these in their pocket when they were off base, they were useless to whoever was out there if anything was to happen to them. NPCs are really cool. They're usually smaller in size than regular money. The thing to know about them is 2 things. The serial number here. They did not make star notes. Not to say they didn't make any mistakes, but instead of putting a star at the end, they would simply leave off that last letter. So if you ever see an NPC that starts with a letter, has the number, and does not have a letter at the end, that would be the equivalent of a star note on an NPC. Now, the other thing with NPCs is the series, okay? You can see this one is series of 591. The first 2 digits of the series tell the year. So this is from 1959, and the 1 means it was the first issue. And if I look at this one here, you can see it says series of 681, so I know this is from 1968, the first series. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean there is a second or a third series, but 1968 first series is how you can tell them. These go back to the 1940s, and they from the 40s through the 70s is how these are. So those are NPCs. Number 5 on the list. You can get books that tell you the print runs on notes and what blocks are rare. This is an example of a rare block. Now, when it comes to blocks, what they're referring to is this letter and this letter. The first letter represents the reserve, so K represents Dallas, and the C, this represents the number of times they have rolled through the notes. Okay, so it was first K, all the letters, and A, and then they did K, all the numbers, and B, and by the time they got to this one, the C block, well, they didn't print all of the C block. They only printed a small portion of it. Okay, so that means that the KC block of the 1988A series, this happens to be a rare series. There were not very many of these out in circulation. And according to my book, notes from this series go for $175. Now, if you don't know what series are rare, you would never be able to pick out these notes. So it is really important to get, I believe, small size paper currency. Small size notes of the United States, I believe, has the rundown on that. It's in edition number 10, and it's probably out of print, and it may be as much as 10 years old by now already. But you can still find this type of information because, well, this note's from 88A, and that would most certainly be in there. All right, those are rare blocks. Number 6 on the list. Nope, that was number 5. Yep, number 6 on the list. We're going with, you can collect notes based on their Federal Reserve. I have a friend who collects everything from Minnesota. All of his notes have to be from the Minneapolis Reserve. Here's just an example. These are all from the New York Reserve. I chose this because of this exact note. This one actually is a Federal Reserve bank note rather than a Federal Reserve note, but it is from New York. And the reason I got this particular note is on the back. That's the battleship note, and this particular note with the battleship, that is the USS New York. So the USS New York battleship on a $2 note from New York. That just kind of fits in with all of my other, here's my $500, all my other New York Reserve notes that I have. So yeah, you can collect notes simply just by going through the reserve, making sure they're all from a particular reserve for whatever reason you may have. If that's where you were born, if that's where you currently live, if that's an area you'd like to go to. It all makes sense, and it is yet another way to put together a collection. Number 7 this week. Number 7, I put together a bunch of CSAs. What are CSAs? CSAs are Confederate States of America notes. Now, these notes are fairly cheap because they don't have any actual monetary value anymore. Most of them were destroyed. They weren't printed very well. Or I shouldn't say that. They weren't printed on good paper, so they don't really last. I don't want to say there isn't a lot of interest, but there wasn't a lot of interest to preserve these. That being said, you have notes like this one here, the Milkmaid with the locomotive, that still ranks number 27, I believe, out of the top 100 notes of all time. There are notes like the 1 and the 2 with the green overprint that do have some extraordinary values. In decent shape, these could easily be $1,000, $2,000. You've got notes like this one here, the $500 Confederate States of America from 1864, a very famous T64 note. There's all kinds of cool versions of the different CSAs. And yeah, you could focus strictly on collecting the Confederate States of America notes. That's number 7. Number 8 this week, we are going with Colonial Notes. I've got 2 Colonial Notes here. Now, what's a Colonial Note? Well, colonial is from the colonies, okay? As in not America, okay? Here is my Delaware Colonial. You can see it's from 1759. This note is older than our country, and this particular note was actually printed by Benjamin Franklin. It's in rough shape, but considering that he was the one that printed it, I don't care. I think that's really cool. And then this one here is right here, 1770 from Maryland. And this one is $50, 50 cents. So 1770, 1759, both currency from one of the 13 colonies, the original colonies, predating our country. There is all kinds of different ways you can collect these particular notes. But yeah, these are colonials. That is number 8. Number 9. These resemble colonials, but these are actually continental currency. Now you'll notice the date on these, 1776, and this one is 1779. This was issued through the Continental Congress of the United States of America. This was during the Revolutionary War, after 1776. So no longer were we colonies, we were the United States, and they were issued by the Continental Congress. That's why they have a different name, continental currency. Like I said, you can see 1779 on this one, 1776 there. Just having a note from 1776, that's just cool. And once again, with 13 states, there are 13 different notes you can get, many different denominations. You can see on the back of this one, they actually used the imprint of a leaf to make sure it was hard to counterfeit. Here they actually have 13 rings, 1 ring representing each state. So those are continentals. That's number 9 this week. Number 10, another thing you can do is you can collect uncut sheets. Here is an uncut sheet of ones. I mean, initially the sheet had 32 items. Now there's 50 per sheet on these notes here, but this is just a portion of that sheet with the 4 notes here. And it's neat to see, because then you get to see how these serial numbers end up getting laid out. Now this one being an uncut sheet, you can see 999 for the numbers. That's a dead giveaway that you have a cut sheet note when it starts with a couple nines, because most of the circulating notes only start with 96 or lower. And the other example of uncut sheet I have is my Detroit, Michigan uncut sheet that I got at the show. I mean, just really cool. It's in this sleeve here, which the sleeve is terrible. The note's much better than the sleeve. But yeah, that's got this particular scene with the Indian hunting the bison, and then you've got the deer, or the elk, I should say, up top. Really cool sheet, really weird way to number things. I've done videos on this, so you guys can check that out later. Anyway, that's number 10 this week, uncut sheets. So there's 10 different ways that you can collect currency. If any of that piques your interest, now you've got a way to focus your collection. All right, guys, if you learned anything new this week, go ahead and hit that like button. If you like what you see and you want to see more, please subscribe. Love reading all your comments. Stay tuned for the next few weeks when I continue this series, and maybe then you'll see something you don't have or didn't know about. All right, guys, thanks for watching. See you next week.